University spin-off company that I founded in 2016 as an EU entity, as a Dutch holding company, with planned projects of regenerative, resilient, self-sustaining neighborhoods around food, water, energy, and circular waste to resource systems. So if you can imagine master planning new subdivisions or new villages or new communities and towns around natural resources, around regenerative practices, that those can be self-sustaining, not only for the people who are living in those communities, but have positive goodwill effects for the surrounding communities and surrounding areas. At the heart of it, really, just like what I was inspired by in visiting Athens, delicious food, absolutely life-affirming kind of organic, biodynamic agriculture, which in combination, soil-based farming with this other kind of farming called aquaponics and aeroponics is a greenhouse controlled environment farming. And these are full circular systems that year-round create very beautiful, biodiverse kinds of menu, food, for the people living in these very healthy communities. The core of our research really has been around a metabolic integration. How can we look at the output of one system becoming the input of another? And that those systems actually can learn from each other and improve. And that's the basis of our Village operating system software. So the Village OS software is this idea of taking regenerative infrastructure, food, water, energy, and waste systems, connecting it to energy positive homes in a community, and then having also external services to mobility, curriculum, individualized, privatized healthcare data. That's all owned, by the way, by the people who live in those communities. So primarily our software does two key things. The first is that it can design and define a regenerative community. And the second is that that same software that was used to design it can also then run the physical neighborhood itself. So imagine a neighborhood that is actually has a sort of farmhouse server that's overseeing the thriving, flourishing components for the people who live in those communities. And then imagine extrapolating from there that communities built in Greece in this Mediterranean climate zone can then share their data with other communities in similar climate zones and then autonomously improve and or mitigate against climate anomalies. We have an amazing pipeline of projects slated for all around the world. ReGen Villages is all about global scale and replication of the model. So what we do, for instance, in Greece is applicable, as I've said, all around the world in those similar climate zones. We've become essentially the Rolling Stones of the modern eco-village movement. Over 100 million web impressions, now close to 23,000 families signed up to live in ReGen Villages communities around the world. Amazing technical partners, of course, and because we're born at Stanford, we're connected to these universities all around the world to expose and express planet-saving, human-saving research, and also to change the rules, because the rules have to be changed. So very simply put, ReGen Villages is part of the green transition. We're part of the EU Smart Rural Village Commission. We're part of this idea of sovereign wealth and pension fund investments, looking at the broader scope of how the future of living really ought to take shape. We've published 2 UN Sustainable Development Goal platform briefs, myself and 2 other professors at Stanford. And ladies and gentlemen, ReGen Villages is the future of living in self-sustaining, self-reliant, beautiful and healthy communities based on Blue Zone research, which is in part born in Greece. So with that, I'm happy to take questions and speak more with you, of course, Alexandra.
Thank you, James. Maybe Scott or Adrian can help me here look for questions if people want to raise their hands. But I have a question for you first. Today, we had invited, finally our agenda was very full, he's not joining us, Professor Josh Ober, who is also teaching at Stanford He's teaching ancient history. He's a specialist in democracy and also in political sciences. And I want to ask you a question, James. Such a project, of course, there is a lot of technology in, there is lots of really hardware, amazing things brought together. But what about the social tissue that you imagine in a village like that? And actually, my question, I could phrase it very simply. Do you think that a ReGen village is compatible with a non-democratic regime?
ReGen Villages is compatible to being compassionate for human survival and thriving on planet Earth. And in that regard, we don't socially engineer the villages. The fabric itself are people who are essentially gravitating, in any case, towards wanting to live in a more symbiotic relationship within nature and not separate from it. And when you live in those conditions around food and healthy living, everything else starts to melt away, including the barriers and differences that people might have, even socioeconomically or culturally or otherwise. So that's our hope, really, that, that these self-reliant lily pads of communities can prosper and grow all around the world.
Socioeconomically, you will have very diverse people in this project, in those villages? I mean,
that's absolutely the main goal, is to create a mix of social housing, which now with coming out into an optimistic post-COVID world, we definitely are going to need much more in social housing. That's going to require systemic funding from governments and pension funds and other kinds of sovereign wealth. At the same time, there'll be a mix of affordable housing and other kinds of typologies that can also allow for co-housing and co-living. So really the whole point is for it to be accessible and approachable.
Okay, can I go back to Scott and find out if there are any questions?
Yes, Alexandra, hello. So just if you want to raise your hand and ask a question, you need to go to the participants box at the bottom of the window, where you'll find a raise hand function. And just click on that, a little blue hand will appear in your box. If you're in a mobile or a tablet, tap the screen and touch on the 3 dots at the top or more, and there you should have a raise hand function as well. And right now we have Gina Belafonte, who has a question for James. So Gina, you have your audio permission.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good morning from Los Angeles, California. It's morning for us here. I wanted to know 2 things. One is, how does one sign up to have the opportunity to live in such a place? And also, in the daily workings of an environment like that, where people will potentially go out of that environment, to work or to do other things and then come back into it, what is the travel procedures? And also, if you already know or not know, and also, does some of the space work as like a cooperative where there are certain, I mean, I always think of the Hunger Games, where different people were good at different things and sort of society got sectored that way. So those are some of my questions.
Yeah, I just posted through the chat window how to get to our website. That's regenvillages.com. And also my email, james@regenvillages.com, in order to get in touch with me directly. In terms of living in the community, we're really looking forward to the future where you could have a ReGen Villages passport. So if you're living in a ReGen Villages community, a regenerative resilient neighborhood, you can come and visit and be part of these other lily pad communities around the world. So it's more campus life, open, not gated community, number one. I think it's very important, that ebb and flow of the modern eco-village kind of movement. The other is, as part of our software, we have a ledger. So part of the Village OS, there's a ledger that will allow people in the community, if they want, they can volunteer to do childcare, elder care, work in the gardens or farms, and then that would then reduce their monthly association fees. So it's really an eco-village or intentional community on their own terms. For those who don't want to do those things, well, then they pay a higher association fee each month. And the association fee, by the way, would include your water, your power, your organic waste bill, as well as delicious organic food sourced at your doorstep, then brought right to your doorstep. So it's full basket, basically.
I think also one of the things that's connected to the work that I do, that is another question for me, would be how does law enforcement play a role in such a space and place, and who sort of mandates what law enforcement and how law enforcement works? I mean, well, I think for us here, a lot of us feel that it would be great if our law enforcement lived in the communities where they police, and that way they would have more of a relationship to the people that live there. But I'm wondering what that looks like there as well.
Well, first of all, we live within the context of each government's rules and regulations and laws. We're not a libertarian, separate, decentralized kind of utopia. First of all, there's no such thing as utopia, as much as maybe the oracles in Delphi might have proclaimed some of these things for certain kinds of behavior. But the truth is that to not have hubris, and that's the key thing that my takeaway always from my studies of Greek philosophy and literature, is that we have to be more human and be in realization of where we are in these communities and attuned to each other. So in the small village neighborhood context, policing is more between people in a lot of ways. But overall, the larger context, of course, is that we fit into whether those counties or regional governments, national governments' laws that are on the books. So it will be culturally probably applicable in those different areas in that way.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Gina. Are there other questions? Scott, can you see another hand raised?
Yes, we have a question from Pepe. Pepe, I'm going to give you your audio permission now. You just want to unmute yourself, Pepe. Let me just help you there. There you go. And if you want to
Hello
speak.
to everyone. I think Gina covered me though. She kind of asked the questions I wanted to ask, so I'm fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Pepe. Anybody else?
Yes, we have a Christiana. Oh, Christiana's gone. Are there any questions in the chat window?
If not, I'm going to ask a last question, James. Where do you think the first ReGen Village will really happen now? I mean, you have different in pipelines in different parts of Europe, I think, and also in the US or Canada, I remember. Where will be the first one?
Oh, it's a really good question. We've been, of course, made the most progress in terms of master planning and thinking in the Netherlands, because we founded as a Dutch holding company. But we have some really exciting updates from the UK. We've recently entered into an agreement with Sir Robert McAlpine, one of the oldest, largest engineering construction firms in the UK. A lot of really great project opportunities there. In Sweden, with white architects. And I know that there's a fantastic symbiotic relationship between Sweden and Greece. We love this idea of triangulating really in the different climate zones between Sweden and Greece, and potentially someplace else in Eastern Europe, for instance, in Romania or another EU country, but that's in the East. So there's a lot of different opportunities for us to look at concurrent development. And really what all it comes down to is two things. It's a matter of money and political will. It's not a matter about technology anymore. All of that exists right now for us to build these communities at scale rapidly around the world, which is of course urgent.
And what is clear, I think, and what everybody should understand is that obviously this is so locally defined. I mean, the environment is so important that it will be very different what will happen in Sweden and in Greece because of the different climates. That's why it is so important to succeed, to have different villages, to find the different ways they really function, isn't it?
That's absolutely true. So architecturally, aesthetically, we will have different interpretations for each of the different regions around the world using local circular building materials, working with local architects and engineers. But overall, there will be, a framework about cost-effective access to these kinds of communities. It's absolutely critical in this, especially coming out of COVID.
And the space you need for a village like that, I mean, can they be downsized or upsized depending? What's the ideal space? What's the ideal number of houses?
Well, the math that we've run so far, approximately 25 hectare or 60 acres, a minimum of at least 300, 350 homes, because then that allows for the full amortization of all the regenerative infrastructure systems. So it keeps those houses, in other words, really affordable. And it's also the right number of kind of homes and people. So 2/3 roughly is open space, productive, edible, permaculture, food forest, berms, guilds, water capture, energy generation, storage, and 1/3 is housing density, like the traditional European village cluster within the radial open space around it. So that's really, I would say, the mix that we're at. We can do more density with obviously more open space. And so we can look at more kind of town infrastructure, but even still, each neighborhood would be have its own self-reliant capabilities. Because that's one of the biggest issues we're facing right now with climate change, is the fact that when something breaks typically in a city, it breaks badly at a district scale. So for a lot of people. So we're really trying to focus on this resiliency in the built environment. And I just want to say that I do see that Christiana is back. If we want to just take a quick question from Christiana, because I know she's eager.
How much more time we have, but I'm sure we have time for Christiana's question.
That would be great.
Okay, Christiana, you have your audio permission. If you want to speak, we'll find you on the screen.
Okay, can you hear me, James?
Yes, hi, Christiana.
Hi, James. How about if we put your programming and your idea into an existing village? Because what is important is that work has to be done and the local people have to accept it and have to be working for it. So, because I've been doing 5 years of work, is it possible to put it in an existing village already?
Absolutely, it's possible to do retrofits. You know, we prefer to start initially on greenfield areas, primarily because we can control for all of the variability from the very beginning. And then from that learning, we can understand which pieces can be taken and best suited for whatever given retrofit opportunities there are out there. And especially for the rural village areas, Christiana, which you know, I know that you have near and dear heart work associated with, that we can be able to be engaged and involved in those kinds of things. And especially to draw in the EU Smart Rural Village Commission funding to inspire and to inoculate these kinds of community developments. So I absolutely agree. There's a lot of things that can be done for retrofits, and it's a big pain point around the world. But at the same time, new subdivisions are being built every day, and they're being built in the wrong way. And we have to get to those places and prove what's possible as quickly as we can, and address the housing shortage, as well as access to clean water, clean food, and hygiene. These are all in that basket of the SDGs.
But I'm very happy Christiana asked that question, because maybe you remember it was my first question to you too. We have wonderful villages in Greece, and I'm sure not only in Greece, in other European countries, which are getting abandoned. And it is extremely important to find ways to make them alive again and allow people to go back to their villages. So I'm really happy, Christiana. Thank you for asking that question.